Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mahima Kaul, and I work for Bumble. I look at their public policy work in APAC, and I am the moderator for the session today, which is called All Ctrl Delete, How Women Reclaim Online Spaces. And this is actually the first brunch with Bumble, as we're going to be calling it. And I just want to give you a couple of words about the idea behind that and then introduce the panel and start the conversation. Bumble is a dating app, but it really puts the experience of women at the heart of its design. And of course, that binary has evolved over time as more and more people are coming online and they want to express themselves and identify themselves differently. But when Bumble started, that was really what it was. Our founder felt that there was no space, or at least in the dating app category, that really put the experience of women at the heart of it. And she believes, and we believe, that safety for women actually means safety for everyone and just a better experience for everyone. With this in mind, what we want to do over here and hopefully in other markets as well is host a series of conversations that keeps the focus on women's experiences online. Over the last so many years, we've seen in the policy sphere, we've seen in the tech sphere, we've seen as entrepreneurs have come. I mean, there has been a lot of forward momentum, and certainly there are more women online than there were before. And we as Bumble also do like internal surveys, and so we have younger women actually telling us in overwhelming numbers, I recognize that I have more opportunities than my mother. They tell us that like if the internet was taken away from me, I would be really angry, right? Like, so we have these internal stats that tell us. But we also want to pause, and we want to just take stock of like all this forward momentum, policy making, products. We just want to take stock of like where they are. Are they really serving the cause of enhancing a woman's experience online? Are they really catering to their safety, really catering to their aspirations and expectations today? And if they are not in some way, can we do a reset and can we see how best to proceed forward? So that's the idea of these brunches. That's the idea of these conversations. Thank you to ORF for actually letting us host this over here. And thank you for this amazing panel who's coming here from different perspectives. I'm just going to introduce them and then start with the discussion. I'll ask a couple of questions. It'll be a little freewheeling. And then I want to open it up to all of you to ask questions and share a little bit with us. So we have with us Priyanka Chaturvedi. She is a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha in India, obviously a policy maker, speaks about women's issues, and we're going to talk to her about what her priorities are. Next to her, we have Brinda Bhandari, who is a Supreme Court lawyer, as well as an author of a very interesting paper called What's Sex Got to Do with It? Mapping the Impact of Questions of Gender and Sexuality on the Evolution of the Digital Rights Landscape in India. So we're going to talk to her about what the digital rights landscape is, and is it gender sensitive and responsive. Next to me over here is Cindy Gallop. She's the CEO of MakeLoveNotPorn. And the goal of this platform is to provide a platform to people to post real-world sex videos and not, a site which is basically trying to, I think, humanize for a lot of people who may understand intimacy as something they've seen in a, in a porn movie. But I think she can speak more to that than I can. Okay, so then who do we have here? Aakanksha. Aakanksha is the founder of Reset, and she is the Reset and Young Leaders Circle. And actually her company, which is born of the internet, is offering mental health services to other businesses. And it's a very interesting and complex equation, which she'll tell us more about. We have Sachee next to her. Sachee is the CEO and the founder of That Sassy Thing, which produces sexual wellness and health products for women. Based in India, so I think her experiences are going to be quite colorful, but also quite, I think, enlightening. And then finally, I can't see Savannah, but she's right on the end of that table. Savannah is a director at IDEO, where she leads design and she builds products over there. And previously, or maybe concurrently, I'm not sure, she has also worked with the Gottman Institute. There's been a lot of research they've done on emotions and relationships, and she's been working with them on something called Emotion AI. I think, so Savannah's going to tell us a little more about both her hats and how she sort of designs products with different users in mind. So, okay, that's a lot. So let's get to actually having the discussion. Priyanka, I'm going to start with you. Of course, I'm going to start with you, but I told her I'm going to start with her, so there was fair warning. I'll just start with India, but then we'll take the conversation a little globally. obviously we know that we live in a country which has been deeply patriarchal, and women over here, have really taken a backseat in societal norms and the way society functions. But having said that, there's been a lot of work that has been done in the last many decades to ensure that the rights of women are brought, forward, whether they be property rights, whether they be laws around sexual assault. There's been a lot of work there. So I want your assessment. Obviously we want to focus on the internet, but I want your assessment of where we are right now and what's the work ahead of us.
So thank you so much, Mahima, and thank you all for a full house here. Wasn't expecting it, so thank you so much for attending this interesting conversation. And we have some amazing panelists here, and I'd really love to hear the views of Sachee, especially considering when Mahima spoke about a deeply patriarchal society that we function in, how difficult it is to do businesses such as this. I would speak from the India perspective, and when we talk about reclaiming online spaces, Mahima, firstly, the biggest struggle for women in India right now is to claim these online spaces, to stay on these online spaces, and then we talk about reclaiming these spaces. So my fight, at least whenever I speak up, is to claim these spaces and ensuring that we create a good experience for them to not leave these spaces. If you look at the statistics in India, there are very few women online. And there are very few women who are on social media platforms, but are speaking on political narratives. So that is something we're trying to change. And this deep distrust about politicians not speaking for women and not mainstreaming their challenges is also something that I feel deeply about. I came from a totally non-political background, and I know the struggles that women go through, and especially on online spaces. I have been very proactive on Twitter, and I can understand where all this comes from. For me, when I talk about policy, I'd look at it as a three-pronged strategy, where I look at it as a personal experience, I look at it as a policy experience coming from governments as well as various stakeholders in policy, as well as social media platforms, the platforms. What are they doing? So there have to be three clear narratives which merge to create a platform which gives a good user experience for a woman to be online. I'll go back to a personal experience would be where I have faced as a politician. Before being a politician, I faced a lot of character assassination. I faced a lot of personal attacks on me, a lot of things which were spoken about my intelligence, my ability to speak on issues, etc. So that comes very naturally in India. So every male thinks it's absolutely okay to slip into my DM and ask me for my telephone number and talk about how beautiful I look, or how ugly I look, or how ugly I speak, or how my voice is. So that is it comes very naturally to men for some reason. It doesn't come so naturally to women somehow, for asking me phone numbers, etc. Or just sliding in with their images which you just don't want to see, and they're ugly to the core, but they think it's absolutely okay for a woman to receive it. So that is one part of it. But in terms of what I saw and I have been fighting for was one particular incident where women from minority groups who have been very vocal and who have been speaking against the establishment faced a lot of sexual harassment as well as online bullying that happened through platforms that were created specifically to target them, which was the Sully by Bully Deals app, where they were bidding on women, they were taking their personal photographs, they were putting it on their site, and they were bidding on these women. I took it up with the IT ministry. Unfortunately, we did not have a policy in place which addresses gender-specific issues. And I think we are working on it. I must say India has very progressive policies in terms of implementation. We see a huge amount of difference. We are coming up with a new policy as well. And the approach that the government is taking is that they're taking in various stakeholders and trying to understand what they can do better, how they can improvise. What I would see is that, like I said, the three ideas, three platforms merging to create a policy which is fluid, which is dynamic, and which keeps up with tech innovations that come up every single day. So Sully by Bully Deals was one big awakening, I would say, awakening of sorts, where women stood up and said, enough is enough, and we need to take a stance, and the government has to step in. Thankfully, a cybercrime cell in Maharashtra took this case up on priority. We saw people as young as 20, 21-year-olds, 18-year-olds who were involved and who were behind this. And that is where this idea came, this idea that came into my head was that just like we have civil society, we have societies where we are discussing these, where we are mainstreaming gender narratives, where we are mainstreaming what is good, what is bad, what is not right, what is possible, not possible. Same way we need to have digital societies in place. We live in a world which is interconnected, which is extremely online, and post-COVID, we've all moved online. So how do we create digital civic sense? And that is what I plan to introduce through my private members bill, which will come up in the winter session. I hope it is taken up, where we discuss this, where we figure out that these are platforms which are part of our lives, and how do, when you have the do's and don'ts through IPC sections on how to behave, and what is criminal, what is not criminal, is something which is now implemented on digital spaces as well. So that is something that I plan to bring into discussion, and I'm hoping we can have more discussion. And I think this is a very forward step that we are mainstreaming gender narratives, where we are speaking about this. There are many intersectionalities that come into place, in terms of caste, in terms of gender, in terms of religion, etc. But however, mainstreaming this narrative is important. So this is how I see it, and moving forward, I'm just hoping that we have a policy in place which will take all of this into account. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Priyanka. Thanks for setting the stage. Rinda, I'm going to come to you because it's a natural. You wrote a paper which was really looking at like tech policy from a gender lens. I want you to just tell everyone why you felt the need to do that, and what are the arguments you actually made and put out?
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's really wonderful to be here among such an exciting panel. So I think the idea for our paper came, I work a lot on tech and digital rights in the litigation space. So I'm a lawyer and I go to court. And one of the things we see in all our digital rights litigation is we never really think about gender, whether what is animating the litigation, whether what is the consequence of the court's decision. Somehow gender is just not one of the things that any of us think about, and including me. Like, it's not that when I'm litigating, I'm always thinking about, okay, what is specifically the impact on women? Is that an argument we can make? And so the idea came for this paper to think about, when we talk about digital rights, are women's rights being expanded or contracted as a result of the court's interventions? And the way we structured our paper was we looked at two sets of cases, so to speak. So one was women as objects of state control. So this is the idea, of women being pure, the stereotype of women being pure and unsexed, and, in Hindi, what you would say, Adarsh Bharatiya Nairi, an ideal woman, the ideal mother, the ideal wife, submissive. And so when you have that framework, then what are sorts of the cases, how our courts are using this framework when they're looking at cases that have come up in India to ban the private consumption of pornography, to regulate the content of our OTT platforms, saying, oh, this is not good, our women should not be either perceived and shown in this way, nor should women be able to consume this content. So both women as actors shouldn't be, dressed in these sort of skimpy clothes, because the idea that the stereotype that people have of women is either this pure virgin or this vamp, and there is no middle ground, right? And so courts end up using this, unfortunately, this stereotype when they're looking at cases about, like I said, pornography, OTT platforms, even things like gang rape and online violence, so that when videos are circulated. The court's response often ends up not tackling the problem, but actually undermining intermediary protection. So saying that, no, now all of your intermediaries should auto-block. The court develop this auto-blocking doctrine, which is that, intermediaries must auto-block all of this content and take the decisions themselves. All of this is encouraging proactive censorship, right? And nobody is going to contest it because, oh my God, how can you say anything? Because then you're against, women's rights. We also, an interesting thing in India now you see is censorship also through bail conditions. So there are a bunch of cases where if an accused, so one of the cases we looked at, this accused had raped his girlfriend and had taken a video. And then he had threatened to circulate that video online and, using that, continued to rape her. And so while, he was then up for bail, and while granting bail, instead of having bail conditions, your standard conditions such as, okay, you're released on bail, please don't speak to the victim, please don't, contact the victim in any way, don't upload the videos in any way. It's like, okay, you cannot use any social media at all. So you can't use Facebook, you can't use LinkedIn, you can't use Twitter, you can't use anything. Now that's, so the conditions were both under-inclusive and over-inclusive. So these were ideas of women as objects of state control, and what we were looking at is a lot of these petitions were not filed by aggrieved persons, but in India, we have this concept of a public interest litigation, often a publicity interest litigation, unfortunately, and what we termed as these middle-class gatekeepers of morality. So what is happening to our women? We have to save our women from this pornography problem. We have to save our women from the way women are depicted online in these OTT platforms. And as we sort of talk about Here, women are both seen as threats of transgression and then the need to control them. So what happens to those women who try and fight against these social mores, who want to say, okay, maybe I want to contest this and maybe I want to fight for my rights. So those were cases we looked at under women as subjects of state control. And just a very interesting example, one of the cases which actually had a positive impact on women's rights, because I've only given all the negative impacts, is, as many of you know, mobile phones are used as tools of surveillance, tools of exclusion, especially in India, right? If you go to rural areas, it's about things like, who is this girl talking to? Girls should not be given a mobile phone. As Priyanka said, many girls, women in India are not online. Why are they partly not online? It's also because, oh, then they'll speak to some boy. Oh, then they may have an affair and they may marry outside our caste, outside our religion, and that's not good for us, right? So you see this also in the cases of hostels. So many hostels actually say women should not be allowed to use their phone after a certain point of time. So why would you need your mobile phones at night? And so this girl, this is a college in Kerala, and they had these separate rules for boys' hostel and girls' hostel, saying that you can't use your mobile phone after, I think, 8 p.m. or 10 p.m. If you have to study, go to the library, you have your laptop. Why do you need your phone? Oh, it's just for entertainment. Like, as if entertainment is also not a right. Like, it's not, like, pleasure is not important or entertainment is not important. And so this girl went to court, and the court actually looked at a lot of UNESCO's guiding principles, all international covenants on education, and said actually access to internet is a fundamental right. It's actually one of the only high court decisions we have in India which has said that access to internet is a fundamental right. There is no reason to restrict women. And sort of two other sorts of interesting cases that I just want to touch upon is, again, when we forget women from the background. Now, all of you know in India, TikTok has been banned. And all the debate around TikTok at that point was, especially in India, TikTok was seen as a, for the lower class. Like, as Priyanka was pointing out, there's an intersectionality issue, right? It was used by people, either queer people, either Dalits, or, women in villages who were using TikTok and getting empowered at that point of time. So when TikTok was banned, the conversation in the upper elite class was like, oh yeah, that's fine. Instagram is really where we are at. And nobody really thinks about TikTok. And so this is, again, just an example of how when the people in power, or the people in the policy discourse, are not the same people as the people getting affected, you sort of forget those rights. And one final, I'll just touch upon, one of the cases we also looked at is what happens in the Me Too movement. So when the Me Too movement happened in India, we had a lot of women writing, there were lots of anonymous allegations that were made, sexual harassment allegations that were made. And this is a very complex issue, right? Like, I don't think it's an easy issue. People have different views. But if it's not a criminal case and it's just a sexual harassment obligation, how are the courts looking at it? And courts in their judgments were saying, oh, we have the right, the accused has a right to be forgotten, or no, it's not an accused actually in this case, but the man has a right to be forgotten too. And you have no right to anonymity, you have no right to privacy of the woman itself. And there were all these gag orders that were passed saying that you cannot write about these publications. And it's not so much as what the decision was. We were more interested in the decision-making process. What was the court considering? And we found that there was no consideration of what are the structural problems that lead women to go anonymous, to be anonymous. So those are some of the issues that we really talked about. And our general conclusion was that, look, courts have the power to both create and ascribe these gender norms, and that often leads the way to society. One of India's most infamous cases, and you unfortunately see it till today, in rape cases, courts often say, oh, either they've gotten married, so now it's fine, don't worry so much, or, what clothes is the woman wearing? And these are narratives that courts, as a judiciary, they should be leading the way. But instead, you sort of then are following society and following the worst parts of society and the worst thoughts in society. So this was broadly what our paper was looking at.
A very short paper with just one or 2 points in it. You've said a lot of things, and so there's a lot to unpack, which I'm hoping will also be picked up by many of you during the Q&A session. But I'll just pick up on one thing that Vrinda said, and Cindy, I'm going to bring it to you. I do feel a lot of times when we are making a case for more women to come online, often the case is a very business case. More women can come and be entrepreneurs, and we're going to talk about that experience because it's a real experience and a tangible benefit. But I think less so is the case for just loitering online, or having that personal space online. Even the moralistic sort of paternal view of saving women, as Vrinda pointed out, is, they possibly won't want to, have a personal life online. We just need to protect them from all the bads that exist. So Cindy, I know you have this platform which, many people in India over here would probably be very uncomfortable to even talk about. But do tell us a little bit about the platform and what started it, and, tell us about it so we can discuss it further.
Sure, and actually, if you don't mind, I want to contextualize Make Love Not Porn by one request and one general tech landscape point before I talk in detail about what I'm doing. If you take one thing away from what I say to you today, please make it this: fund female founders. And the reason I say that is because the young white male Silicon Valley founders of the giant tech platforms that dominate our lives today, they are not the primary targets, online and offline, of harassment, abuse, sexual assault, rape, violence, revenge porn. Therefore, they did not and they do not proactively design for the prevention of any of those things on their platforms. And we see the results around us every single day. Those of us who are at risk every single day, women, people of color, LGBTQ, the disabled, we design safe spaces and safe experiences. And to give you my own example, which honestly needs to be a much more widely spread business case study. So my startup, Make Love Not Porn, is pro-sex, pro-porn, pro-knowing the difference. We are the world's first and only user-generated, crowdsourced, social sex video sharing platform. We are what Facebook would be if it allowed you to socially, sexually self-express, which it obviously doesn't. The way to think about it is, if porn is the Hollywood blockbuster movie, Make Love Not Porn is the badly needed documentary. We are a unique window onto the funny, messy, loving, wonderful, comical ways we all have sex in the real world. We are socializing sex, making it easier for everyone to talk about, to promote consent, communication, good sexual values, and good sexual behavior. We are literally sex education through real-world demonstration. And ultimately, our mission is to end rape culture. We end rape culture, and by the way, we have 10 years of proof of concept. We end rape culture by doing something incredibly simple that nevertheless nobody else anywhere is doing. We end rape culture by showing you how wonderful, great consensual, communicative sex is in the real world. Our social sex videos role model good sexual values and good sexual behavior. And here's the important part. We make all of that aspirational versus what you see in porn and popular culture. And you'll hear more about this tomorrow in my speed talk, but you should just know that we are a global platform. India has been our 6th highest source of traffic for years, even though we do nothing in India. We have no funds or resources here. And young people from India write to us all the time and say, please, please launch a local version. We need you here. And I'm sharing this because I and my tiny team, and by the way, that includes my brilliant user experience designer, Uni Chase, who today is a colleague of Savannah's at IDEO, I'm thrilled to say. I and my tiny team spent literally years concepting and designing Make Love Not Porn before we ever built it, because we knew if we're going to invite people to do something that they've never done before, socially share their real-world sex, we had to think through every possible ramification of that to create a completely safe and trustworthy space. I designed Make Love Not Porn through the female lens to be the safest place on the internet. And we are, because I designed it around what everybody else should have, nobody else did, human curation. There is no self-publishing of anything on Make Love Not Porn. Our curators watch every frame of every video submitted from beginning to end before we approve or reject, and we publish it. Nobody else does that. But it's not just that. We review every post on every member profile, photo, text, illustration, before we approve or reject, and we publish it. No one else does that. We review every single comment on every single video before we approve or reject, and we publish it. No one else does that. We can vouch for every single piece of content on our platform in a way that nobody else can. And that is why we are the safest place on the internet. And we take human curation to lengths that nobody else does. So you can't finish submitting a video to Make Love Not Porn unless it's fully consensual, legal, everyone's over 18. We require full identifying details for every participant, 2 forms of government-issued ID. But even when we know it's consensual and legal, our curators are trained to watch every video and look at it and go, is the camera in a position where everybody knows it's there? Is there anything about this video that gives you a bad feeling? Because a bad feeling is enough reason for us to reject it. We are tiny, bootstrapping, we have no money, and we've human curated everything for 10 years. Imagine what Facebook, YouTube, et al. Could do with their billions of dollars. So that's just one example of how, as women, we design safe spaces, safe experiences that men will absolutely love and enjoy as well. And yet, last year, only 2% of all venture capital went to female founders. As I say, if you take one thing away from what you hear me say today, please do everything you can, tell everybody, fund female founders. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I mean, I can go in so many directions with the comments that you made, and I'm wondering who to go to next. But I just want to say one thing, that resonates a lot with me, the idea of female founders and safe space, because, I worked for a social media company earlier, and so our audience was everyone. And I can see the difference when you are actually more intentional about making it a safer space. And so the policies that you come up with, the tech that you develop, the enforcement measures that you take, they're really catering to a much more sensitive and safe experience. And so, if you're more intentional, I think, about what you're trying to achieve, there is a lot that can be done. Maybe I'll stick with the design element and how we design spaces, and then I'm going to come to both of you. There's a book that many of you may have read called Invisible Women. And Invisible Women actually makes us realize that so many of the spaces that we occupy right now, as Cindy rightly said, have been designed by men for men. And so it talks about, the size of the airbags, and it talks about the size of the brick, which is meant for a male hand, but of course so many women workers are working in construction, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's very eye-opening. And so Savannah, I want to come to you, because I know IDEO is a really interesting place, and there's a lot of thoughtfulness about designing products. So let me give you the floor to kind of carry on what Cindy's been talking about.
Yeah. Cindy, also, I met you 5 minutes ago, but I love you so much. so much. Taking a step back, I think that a lot of the time when people hear design and they hear that I'm a designer, they think that it's, visual, kind of how things look, end of the funnel, and that's a really beautiful craft and a part of the design process. But design is about how things work. And the way that design happens is through the people in the room that are creating whatever product, service, experience, whatever it is that you're trying to make. And without having the right people in the room, the incentive models and the end experience is tailored towards who is in the room. And for the most part, if we look at power structures and power dynamics, the people in the room historically, and in many ways currently, are men. Specifically speaking from the US, are white men. And that doesn't give the perspectives that we need in order to create these safe spaces. So thank you all for the work that you all do. IDEO specifically is a global design firm. So we create market-leading products, services, experiences for companies large and small. We also help businesses transform into more innovative companies. So a lot of the time, businesses are kind of focused on a core that is, safe to however they've grown, and that has a lot of beauty in the fact that you're building, creating something, and also it kind of leads you inside of a container. And so if you've spent a lot of your time as somebody who's operating a business, just building inside of that container, and you are that group of traditional people that has been in the room, traditional people, then what happens to your business? It stays the same. So design as an evolution is a practice that needs to continue to evolve and is something that needs to be adopted into how we work and how we think and how we build all of the systems around us. And we need to think of these things as products, as services that can evolve, and not just so that they can evolve, so that they are catering towards, financial incentives and other kind of traditional like capitalist markers, but they need to be evolving in ways that are supporting the types of experiences that are going to nurture people in the ways that are really healthy to the environment that we all want to live inside of. Separately, I've spent some time working with the Gottman Institute, and I'll add the disclaimer that it's actually my family business. My stepmom is a co-founder. For those of you that don't know, the Gottman Institute is a relationship research company. And so John Gottman has been studying couples for the past 45 years to understand what makes and breaks a good relationship. So he's both a psychologist and a mathematician, and just by watching a couple interact, he can predict with 96% accuracy whether they will stay together or get divorced. And so much of what that comes down to is that in relationships, in relation dynamics, and of course his research has been done in mostly for couples, but I brought in a speaker from a certified Gottman therapist into IDEO last year as a speaker because everything that they teach is really applicable to like any time that you're interacting with another person. It's about emotional intelligence, it's about respect, it's about holding space, it's about showing up in a way that is really human and sensitive to the person in front of you. And what if we designed that way? Like, what if we factored in, that most technology spaces are about connecting with other people? They're about sharing information, they're about sharing experiences. And so what if the background for how we do that was emotional sensitivity, respect, care, love? Could probably have a much better world.
Kindness, empathy, these are such important things that we forget and trade them sometimes for efficiency and cutting down friction, and not realizing that we're not keeping such basic human core tenets in mind. Part of what we wanted to also kind of explore in this discussion was currently, how are women actually expressing their agency online? What are the new ways in which they're using the online space? And I think we've got two people here who can really speak to like what's happening online, where the action is at. So Sachee, can I start with you? Because I think your company is catering to something which probably didn't exist as easily available before, which is like sexual wellness and health products, but B, across a range of demographics that might surprise people. So can you tell us a little bit about your origin story and then some takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I want to start with a quote because I want to go a little back towards, what Priyanka was saying about why women need to reclaim space. And I remember this quote by Dolly Parton, who's an American singer-songwriter, who says, "Find out who you are and then do it on purpose." And I would that's something that's really inspiring for me. And I'm a sexual wellness entrepreneur. And I'm here to revolutionize the sexual wellness space in India, and I hopefully can do it globally as well. So I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the Indian landscape when it comes to sexual wellness brands, on the whole. So I started that Sassy thing, which is an online-first, feminist, inclusive, new age sexual wellness brand in January 2021. So this was right in the middle of the pandemic. We are a COVID baby. And at that time, we had the space dominated by men. Men leading sexual wellness brands, making products for other men, having conversations that were only aimed at men. What happened to women and people of other genders? They were totally left out I would say, in all cultural conversations in terms of representation as well. So when you look at a lot of sexual wellness products, and let's say if you look at a pack of condoms even, you'd have this stereotypical, image of a heterosexual couple in there with a stereotypical image of a woman, and again, at the end of it, objectifying women. So our goal was also to bring more representation visually as well. So as a brand, we have women, I would say, of all bodies, diverse bodies, so real bodies. Our goal is not to show women just with washboard abs, who are fair and tall and skinny, but also to show the real bodies, right? Like women like us, women with freckles, women with pimples, women with body hair, and really own that, own that image in one sense. So again, it's about putting the right messaging out there through our visuals, through our communication as well, and really helping women take charge of their bodies in that sense. We do empower women by selling the pleasure products that we do sell, but I think we are much bigger than that. We are a brand with a purpose, and owing to that, I'd love to talk a little bit more about how we are leading this sex-positive revolution through, by keeping sex ed at the forefront. So we recently launched these online masterclasses on sex ed, where we've actually collaborated with credible best sexuality educators in India to launch comprehensive, inclusive, and free masterclasses that educate people about different aspects of their bodies, their sexualities, their gender even. So we have one masterclass which is a 101 on gender and sexuality, where you basically understand the difference between gender and sex, but you also understand what pronouns are, how to address people with the right pronouns. Because I wish I had that education growing up. I'm sure the world would be a kinder place, if we were taught those things in our formative years. We also have another masterclass which talks about the basics of sex ed. So it talks about consent, it talks about pleasure, it talks about the human anatomy as well, because a lot of us don't know enough about our own bodies to begin with. And we are also launching one which is in Hindi and English, on consent, because our goal is also to really make sex ed more accessible by launching, online sex education in more and more regional language. So I really want to build for Bharat in that sense, and make sure that our content can really, transcend geographies in that sense. But I think when you touched upon this idea of people coming from all age groups, I think I can proudly say we are able to empower people right from 20s to 50s and beyond, even if you're talking about age groups and demographics specifically. So I think what's personally very inspiring for me as a woman entrepreneur is when customers write to me and share their stories of how they took charge of their own pleasure, or when a woman says that she experienced pleasure for the first time after 25 years of her marriage. That's something that's truly empowering for me. When women say that they gift their products to their mothers, I think daughters saying that, that's really empowering for me. Because I feel women are not seen as sexual beings to begin with, and I think that's something that we are trying to change and normalize. We are also the first brand in India that is bringing diverse narratives to the forefront when it comes to people's bodies, their sexualities, and beyond even. So we've actually collaborated with a UN-recognized organization called Revival Disability India that actually is a community of disabled queer folks, and we are actually bringing narratives to normalize disabled pleasure and joy as well. So the idea is to actually bring more and more voices to the forefront and really give them a platform to share the lived experiences, which can further empower and inspire other people to speak up as well.
That point, Sachee, that's such an important conversation to have, because I know organizations like Point of View have long worked on these issues, saying that many disabled people are actually subject of sexual violence. People assume that they can just go ahead and do what they want, and they won't actually tell anyone. So I think like bringing out their narrative point of view, empowering them to actually also express their own sexuality. I mean, that's the genius of the online space, that more voices can actually come out, and we must encourage them to come and speak plainly and freely. I'm sorry you have been waiting so long, but I think, I think it's a good place to kind of bring the discussion. The truth is that there is a lot happening online, a lot of different, platforms that have come up, a lot of different problems that we are looking at. But we are also living in the post-COVID world where people have spent a considerable amount of time online, and that is not going away. Hybrid work is here to stay. I feel bad for some of you who may have to go back to the office full time, but I think mostly we've adapted to this quasi-online life. But it also means that mental health is an issue that really came up to the forefront. That's good. But also that it, I think, compounded a little bit because of what took place. So, Aakanksha, please tell us about your company and what you're catering to over there.
You don't have to apologize for keeping me waiting because it's an absolute pleasure to listen to all these wonderful women. So at Reset, what we do is that we build inclusive, scientifically backed and expert curated mental health resources and services for organizations to offer to their employees. So what that means is if you log onto the platform and Sachee logs onto the platform, you're going to get very different resources based on your own individual experiences and journeys. And when we're doing this, we also take into consideration the socioeconomic factors like caste, policy. We take, your familial dynamics into consideration. So everything is taken into consideration, and you're given resources that cater just to your own personal well-being. And I think that's really important because we're talking a lot about women's experiences online, and women experience it, as all the panelists have said, in very different ways, right? So research has found that women are trolled more than men, and it's men who are more likely to be the trolls. And if you're a woman in leadership, that experience is amplified for you. And I just want to, I've followed Priyanka Chaturvedi on Twitter for a long time, and she's talked about the messages that she's received. So last year for our podcast, I was talking to Apar Gupta, who's the founder of the Internet Freedom Foundation, a digital rights advocacy firm. And he said, Aakanksha, go to any prominent woman that you follow, go to her social media timeline and see the comments that they receive, even if it has nothing to do with their work. So before this panel started, Priyanka, I took a visit to your timeline. You had posted something about a Diwali sweet, Son Papri. I looked at the comments. There were, men had come out of the woodwork with their opinions on why you're wrong about that. You had posted about a book. There was something around that as well, and the Indian cricket team, of course. And, men had come with their comments about that too. So it actually, it doesn't matter what she would have tweeted. Even if she said the weather's great today, somebody would have come and been like, no, you're wrong. It's absolute trash. Right? Exactly. So, I mean, there's that also. The online is an extension of our physical space, and as more women get online, then the existing patriarchal structures and dynamics change, and men then feel a loss of power in some way, and that also results in a lot of the experiences we have online. And the other thing I want to say is because, online work is here to stay, when we're working with organizations, before we were, training managers about physical workspaces and the dynamics they need to keep into consideration, the microaggressions. Now, as we talk to female employees, women are saying that, hey, even if it's a video call or an audio call, I'm still facing sexual harassment. You have men saying, hey, your voice is so beautiful. Why don't you, talk more? Why don't you do this? I'd love to get on a late night call with you. Men don't have that experience, whereas women, even if they're working from home, have said that they still have the expectation and the pressure that they have to look a certain way, their hair needs to be perfect, their makeup needs to be perfect. Whereas, for men, you can just have like a shirt at the top, shorts at the bottom, right? And you'll be fine. Whereas for women, we are now going in and training managers to explain to other employees and just generally have the conversation about how sexual harassment can exist in hybrid workspaces as well.
Yeah, that's very important, and it's sad also, but I did read that there were a pool of scientists in Antarctica, and there's been a complaint of sexual harassment over there, so it's difficult. Before I open it up for questions, because I know some of you must have picked up on some of the comments, I just want to tell you a little something, a little information about something Bumble has taken up as a subject to solve, and I want to share it because I want all of us to kind of think along more lines of how we can actually collectively approach a problem from different angles. So, Bumble did user survey back in the day, a couple of years ago, to try and understand from the user base, what are the problems that you are facing, and obviously asked a lot of women, what are in the hierarchy of problems. And so lewd pictures, what are called dick pics basically, lewd pictures was one of the biggest responses that came back saying, we just don't want to keep receiving these. And it's already been mentioned on the panel in different contexts, right? Like just being inundated. So the company did two things. One was we used proprietary technology, previously proprietary technology. It has been open source now, to blur these pictures on arrival. Now, it is a dating site, and people can consensually be exchanging pictures, but it came blurred on arrival, and then you could choose to either view it or report it, right? So there was identification of the problem, technology being applied to at least cause some friction in that process and give the user control of what they want to do next. In the meantime, some of our public policy colleagues, they went into markets like states in the US and the UK and actually lobbied for governments to criminalize the offense. Because when women went to the police to say, this person has sent me a picture, the police said, well, we know it's wrong, but there's nothing we can do about it because it's not on the books. So, along with many other nonprofits, certainly Bumble was not the only one, but, lent its voice to the cause. And so it has been made an offense in certain markets where it wasn't. In certain other markets, it already is, so that's good to know. And then finally, just 2 days ago, we've open sourced that technology. So if other platforms want to actually use it. So, it is not like the ultimate solution or the be-all and end-all, but I'm just saying that you can find a problem and then thread the loop from a policy perspective, from a tech perspective, and then you can maybe, take a step back and say, did it work? Is it effective? Do we need to do something else? So hopefully our conversations will start getting more specific about things that we pick up and then try and thread the needle from different perspectives. But I do want to give the floor to all of you who've been waiting and questions. So let's start with you, sir.
Hi, a very good afternoon, everyone. I am Rahul Banerjee, and I'm the managing director of Rice in a House. It's basically a think tank, and something we very closely work on is bringing on women into the workforce. And when we speak of workforce, we are a COVID time startup. We started in 2020 when COVID was at peak, and we started virtually. So a problem that we faced with individuals coming up, and something about the organization, I remain the only man in a board of directors of 6. All of the 5 are women, and it's actually more comfortable to work with them because they know what to do. But otherwise, a problem that we faced was to take care of online harassment. And specifically about India, there was nothing existing at that time that addressed the POSH, prevention of sexual harassment at workplaces. So what we had to do in-house was to reform that whole thing, reform the whole structure, and then frame up the thing in order to address online issues as well. How to address online harassment, what to do when individuals reach out to you over LinkedIn stating, hey, beautiful, it's great to connect with you. I want to know more about your work. So something like these things. Another question.
I want to give opportunity to
Sure,
other people. Maybe a couple of comments and then we'll just give it to the panel. Ma'am, and then, yeah.
Helani Galpai, I run a think tank called Learn Asia. What do we do about men? A lot of the solutions have been about empowering women, and I think that's a huge part of the solution, certainly what Cindy's talking about. But a lot of the problem is stopping the man from sending the dick pic and that assumption of privilege that it can be sent. So, and is it a generational issue, and how do we deal with older men? I mean, I'm raising a son, and this is a really personal question as well. Yeah. Where do we start? What kind of education work? What are the models that work to change the way men think about this?
I'd like to answer.
Sure, I'll come back to you, and I think Priyanka has Bill as well. The question. They'll start serving lunch soon, so let's have them.
Quick question. Priyanka mentioned earlier that when it's bully deals, etc., type of harassment, you can quickly take a stance on this, right? Because it's a no-brainer, it's wrong. But a while ago, I saw one of the members of parliament, very senior members of parliament, had uploaded a picture on Twitter, I'm not going to name them, saying that who says Lok Sabha is in a place for, Lok Sabha is in an attractive place with a bunch of women, senior women MPs, right? Now what happens is when it's very obvious to take a stance, you take a stance, everybody supports you, right? When it's not very obvious that, that stance, it becomes sort of a struggle for whoever is taking that stance, and then you're called like you're little too extra, whatever those things are. So what do the panelists think about that, that nuanced existence of patriarchy, especially in India or outside, but definitely in India? So that's my question.
Yeah.
And one quick product idea feature idea for you. Instead of just blocking that dick pic, let the woman choose if she wants it to be a bouquet, a chocolate, or whatever. And that's what arrives to her.
That's really interesting. Yeah, the casual misogyny and sexism and how to call it out. Okay. So we want you, and then let's go back to the panel for last.
My name's Aditya, and we're building a friendliest social network. But I'm just going to preface my question quickly. So I was on Crunchbase, and they released a report, and they said only 2.3% of the 200 billion odd funding from the VCs were directed towards women-led startups in 2020. Further, women VCs were more likely to invest in female-led startups, but if that in early stages. But if that was the case, women startups could not raise further rounds because other male VCs weren't taking them seriously because they thought it was just women supporting other women with cute ideas. And the second thing is, Reid Hoffman and his whole blitzscaling thing, grow at any cost, break things, and just pay a fine later. So, this all points to you not really caring about things or, the social outcome of whatever product that you're building. So my question is that should it be introduced at a policy level, wherein in India we have reservation quotas, so should VCs or investment houses be regulated? So there should be a female co-founder, there should be a minimum amount of funding going to female startups, or should it be more self-regulated? So I just wanted to throw it out to the panel.
Okay. You had a question, and then we'll go to the panelists. Yeah.
Loudly, so everyone can hear. Loud.
Oh, just come to a mic in front so that we can capture it as well.
Yeah. Hi. My question is to Vrinda specifically. And Vrinda, I'm sure you're aware of this case, but just for some context for the others, recently a man was, just a few days back, he was granted bail in a rape case on the pretext of the false promise of marriage. And the narrative that's actually been going around in the media, more than the rape case, is that there's no question of false marriage in the first place because the woman uses Tinder, and the fact that she's posted on multiple accounts that she doesn't believe in the institution of marriage. And while reading that, it's actually bizarre to me, as I'm sure to many other readers. So with you as someone who's working in the courts, as a woman who's working at the intersection of tech and gender, how do you navigate such absurd situations of moral policing right from the the highest sanctums of law? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, quick one, and then Vrinda, maybe we can start with you and go down the.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Gautam Saxena. I'm based in Singapore, and I run a tech-focused impact fund. Refreshing to hear all the views. I just thought that some of the responses tend to be a bit more defensive, right? That we are in a sports analogy, attacks are going to come, and how do we block it? But as the technology minister yesterday said, we've got 800 million internet users. I think that's fantastic. But it's also 800 million users, of whom a lot are youth, who are unchaperoned, unfettered access, and a lot of pollution in the mind without the right education. So a bit like your question as well, that there's this tribe of youngsters who's coming out without the right education, without the right access to content which you're producing, Sachee. So how do we nip this in the bud and bring it up that the education as part of growing up in your formative years leads you to behaviors which are not appalling to us as we see, in regular events which we are observing?
Okay, so Vrinda, maybe we can start with you and come down the line. And then I promise you will get lunch.
I think, this is a problem we see throughout. I think, like you said, from Supreme Court to trial court levels, unfortunately, there are many judges who are going to pass comments like that. I think really the only thing you can do is to continue to call out those orders sometimes you do see that when there's a particular outrage over a particularly egregious order, like there's a transfer, like a judge's transfer or something. But I think all you can do is really have more people speak out about it, more people, I mean, recently, just yesterday, I think in Haryana, was one of the courts, in the district courts in some other state, they said, in Pune, I think, women should not tie their hair because it's distracting. Like if they touch their hair during quotas, yeah, it's really distracting, right? So I mean, all you can do is just try and raise this outrage. But I just also wanted to add, I think, to both your questions, and how do you stop men, or how do you, so even, I have a daughter and a son, and one of the things I've seen is all the books are sort of catered on, you know, good touch, bad touch. Like how do you protect your daughter from like the world?
Yeah.
And nobody really focuses on what do you tell your son to make sure that they don't do sort of things that are then violative of consent. And I think so much is also dependent on the role of schools and how they teach like sex education and consent. So I just think that's sort of a long game, but I think we do need change from there as well.
So Priyanka, that's a good point to talk about what you're proposing to introduce.
In fact, I must elaborate more on the digital civics bill that I'm introducing. It makes it compulsory to make this how you behave on platforms or digital spaces, how you behave is something which should be part of a syllabus. Is something that is going to be forming an important part of it. And also just because as a mother of a 19-year-old boy, my personal experience, even during school, there were parents who had a huge problem with, sexual education. In the 8th grade, many parents were totally against this idea of children having to be educated on that front. And I used to wonder why would that be a problem, considering most of the families in Indian homes do not discuss normal sexual behavior and how boys should behave. So as a mother, I was very conscious of the fact that the son I raise should know how to respect women and should know his own boundaries and how you have to behave in societal spaces. So that is something which comes from within, but if it doesn't, then the digital civics bill, I hope it becomes a law sometime, because very few private members' bill go on to become acts. That is point one. The point two, which you raised about, oh, it is very obvious the Sully by bully deals to take a stance. I'm sorry to disappoint you. It wasn't very obvious when it came up. In the month of July, not a single politician raised this particular issue except, and I hate to say it, but it was only me who continued to speak to the IT minister about it. IT minister was responsive, but of course he did not take it seriously, because most of the time, when women raise these voices about women's issues, they're like, why are you always playing the victim? Why are you always playing the victim? I find that so unbelievable that in these days and times that we live in, we continue to say that if we are, I would say, telling you about the challenge that woman is facing, you call us a victim. We are not victims. We are empowered enough to come and tell you that this is a challenge. It started from July. Nothing happened till January. And January, when I got the Maharashtra police to step in and to take suo motu action, that is when. So as much as it may seem obvious to you, it somehow wasn't obvious to people and places and raising voices. So that is another challenge that we face on how to have these conversations. Also, when you spoke about a member of parliament, I know exactly which tweet you're talking about. Very popular member of parliament too. But all I'd say here is, that is because there are very few women in these spaces, even in parliaments, even in your legislative assemblies, legislative councils. Those women who are there choose not to speak up on gender issues because they believe the voters are males too. Why should we just focus on women-focused issues or women-related issues? So that is an unfortunate reality we're facing. But last, I just want to make this small little point. I used to find it so difficult when I entered the parliament that every response that I was getting in my parliamentary question was, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, sir, no, sir. It seems such a small thing, but it used to disturb me tremendously. That why can't you address me for who I am? And I wrote this, and they were very positive about it. They said, but listen, if we say no ma'am, no sir, etc., it becomes a little challenging because there are many multiple responses. So I said, make it gender neutral. Let's be gender neutral about it. And they agreed to it. I got a letter confirming it that yes, we will, all our parliamentary responses would be gender neutral. So these are small things. Till you do not I would say, till you don't step up and get heard and make your voice heard, till then you're not going to see much changes happen. I've also realized that the parliamentary rule book, parliamentary rule book is also very gender specific and it's only male oriented. So that is also something which is a work in motion I'm going to be working on. So yes, every small step counts. Yeah. It's not small though. Yeah, it is not so, it just went boom.
I'll come to you, but just take a minute.
I want to answer two questions as quickly as possible. The one about what we do about boys and men, and your question about funding. I designed Make Love Not Porn around my own philosophies and beliefs, one of which is that everything in life starts with you and your values. So I regularly ask people this question: what are your sexual values? And no one can ever answer me because we're not taught to think like that. Our parents bring us up to have good manners, a work ethic, sense of responsibility, accountability. Nobody ever brings us up to behave well in bed. But they should, because in bed, values like empathy, sensitivity, generosity, kindness, honesty, trust, respect are as important as those values are in every other area of life where our parents actively teach us to exercise them. So I am building a solution to this. I'm going to talk about my speed talk tomorrow, so I'm not going to share it now. I'm raising funding for it, but it will be the resource that parents need to be able to either send their children to or be able to access themselves. I wanted just to answer your question about funding. No, the answer is not to legislate for it. Because if you say you've got to have a female co-founder, what you will have is the gender flip of what currently happens, unfortunately, with female founders, which is where they actually get in the US. You know, I know female founders who've gotten a token white male to pretend to be their co-founder to get funding. So there are ways of gaming the system. The answer very simply is, and again, you know, I think CyFy is powerful enough to make this happen. You know, we need LPs to fund female-founded funds so that they then fund more female founders. Everything boils down to one thing, everybody. Just give us access to capital. Give us access to money. Give us access to funding. We can solve all of this. And men, you know, we live in a world where the default setting is always male. Men, you have no idea how much happier you will be living in a world that is 50-50 equally informed, influenced, led, and designed by all of us. Just give us the money.
Yes. Okay. Any quick thoughts, and then we'll...
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to add and, you know, address both your questions. I think what we are trying to do, and, you know, we are trying to do our bit in not just educating the youth, but I think the idea is to educate the educators as well. So, you know, parents, teachers, and I hope we can actually institutionalize our masterclasses, online masterclasses as well. So if anyone can help me do that, I'm all ears. But for example, when we've launched this, we're launching this, you know, course, this masterclass on consent, which not only talks about online consent, but also talking about consent in an offline setting. What does consent look like at home when you're a 12-year-old and a relative asks you to sit on their lap? How do you address and navigate that scenario? So I think it's all about real life and real world situations, and how do we really help youngsters navigate those situations, even from an Indian context, right? When you get married, marriage is not equal to consent. So really addressing all those situations and you know, helping people really take the right decision. That's what we aim to do with our courses, with our master classes. We are bootstrapped, but we are investing a lot of money in producing these high quality videos in order to educate people with the right information, the Instagram first audience, the youth, but also going beyond and, you know, making sure that these courses are accessible and relevant for older generations as well. So that's how we are doing our bit, you know, being a brand which is driven by purpose.
Thank you.
A couple of things quickly. So when we're talking about, you know, digital civics bills in Parliament, whether in India or otherwise, I definitely do think we need to take into consideration mental health education as well, to make people realize, you know, for your son or other people, to make them realize the repercussions abuse can have, the real life repercussions abuse can have on people. If you're consistently trolled, you can go on to, you know, develop depression, PTSD. There there have been attempts of suicide, suicidal ideation, you develop eating disorders. There's a myriad of mental health challenges that come when you are consistently trolled. And if you are, then you tend to also develop a distrust in social media and engage less. So what that means is we already have a subsect of the population that's not online, but then the women who do come online and then their voices are suppressed, they tend not to engage, so then they aren't active participants as well. And I think, so we definitely, because trolling has become so normalized, we definitely need to start having these conversations about how it impacts us and the women around us in our daily lives, which is why it's so important to have male allies who speak up for you as well. And then the other thing, I also just, we've talked a lot about funding as well. The other thing is also, IDEO is a big proponent of this, is first mile health, which is investing in technologies that promote digital cohesion and trust. So I think if you are a male VC, definitely please look into that as well.
Savannah, you get the last word.
Yeah, I'll keep it short because I know that we're probably getting hungry. I, specifically addressing your questions, I think we have two things. One is supporting women, simple, not simple systemically, but simple from a principle level. And the other is just showing up with more love and having that be a value that is more generally propagated. And when we talk about that, it's not just like, romantic love or, love that you have for your brother, your father, whatever. It's how do you approach your work? How do you approach society? How do you approach technology from a place of love? And how does that factor into the design of these spaces that we get to inhabit? I think that the general social consciousness is evolving. There's a Martin Luther King quote that's, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And it's so easy to be fatigued by how much we have to push in order to keep our agenda at the forefront and to create more space, to support more women. So pleasure is super important, and I think that we need to make sure that we are investing in ourselves and investing in our community of women, and we're living with the values that we want to see.
That's as good a place as any to end it. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I just want to say this conversation is actually not over, but we'll pick it up at another venue at another time. And